Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, a mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in. What is up, podcast listeners? Welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm your host, Ann Kaplan, and I'm very excited to be here with you today and really pumped about the topic that I've picked for us to talk about today, which is rules. And specifically, if you have read any of the Love and Logic books and stuff like that, you may have heard of something called enforceable statements. I'm not necessarily specifically talking about like the Love and Logic way of teaching all of that stuff, but I think essentially the reason why I like the way that Love and Logic describes enforceable statements, and they use that's kind of their buzzword, enforceable statements, is because it's really talking about how we set boundaries. And with parenting, we're talking about setting boundaries. We're really talking about making rules, making and enforcing rules, right? The reason why I love that paradigm is because it really shifts the focus. So one thing that I hope you're going to get out of today's episode is a total 180 on how you think about setting rules and enforcing rules with your kiddos. Okay. Like literally flip-flopping to the opposite of what you think rules are, the opposite of how you think about rules, the opposite of how you experience rules, the opposite of how you enforce rules. Everything about rules is going to get turned upside down today. So I really hope that makes you really, really excited and you cannot wait to hear my amazing confession. It's time to step into the confessional because this is called Confessions of a Parent Coach, right? So my confession to you today, listeners, is that I sometimes have been known to threaten my kids. And I definitely have been known to do this a lot more in the past than I do now, but it still happens. And here's what I mean when I say I threaten my kids. And I guarantee you do it too. Have you ever said to your child something like, if you don't clean up your room, I'm going to throw out all your toys. Or if you eat your dinner, you'll get dessert. Or if you're good at the doctor's office, we'll go out for boba afterwards, which I literally have said in the last year. My kids are obsessed with boba. Boba everything. My favorite boba, which I never would have discovered if my kids hadn't forced me to experience boba a million times. I just like a regular milk tea boba with no sweetener and regular boba, the regular tapioca boba. My kids like popping boba. I don't like it. I think it's disgusting. Also, it always is like super fruity, and I don't get down with like fruity tea combos. No thanks. Anyway, I definitely have said to my kids, if you're good at the doctor's office, we'll get boba. Rule of thumb, pay attention to this. When we use the word if, we are almost always threatening or bribing our children. So in my example of if you're nice at the doctor's office, we'll get boba, that was a bribe. It was a total bribe. Or how about if you don't clean up your toys? I'm donating them all to Goodwill. That's a threat. I really like, this is one of like little rule of thumb things when I'm teaching my clients. Like it literally says this in the workbook my clients get, like rule of thumb, pay attention to if you're using the word if, because usually that's a word to avoid. And sometimes when we're trying to learn this kind of like wordsmithing part of parenting, where we're trying to learn like, how can I say this in a way that's not gross? We need little rules of thumb like that. So if you take nothing else from this podcast, take away that. Pay attention to when you use the word if. See if you can eradicate that from your lexicon as a parent. The words if and but. If is usually a threat or a bribe. But is a great way to negate all the awesome stuff you almost just said to your kid. You're doing great in school, but you still have a lot of missing assignments, right? So if and but, those are my little gifts to you today. Just kick them to the curb. We're not going to use those words anymore because it never ends well. So that is what I mean when I say I threaten my kids. So now here's something that happens a lot with new clients. We're just starting to learn this new way of like giving consequences. We're starting to click for parents. And I'll tell you, like, the trajectory that my parents tend to go on with me. When I say my parents, I don't mean my actual parents, because neither of them would ever be remotely interested in learning any of this stuff. When I say my parents, I mean my clients. I'm being very possessive today, apparently. But the trajectory that I see most of my clients go through is about the first 3 months of our work together is like drinking from a fire hose in terms of like information, and also a lot of resistance because it's a bunch of stuff that is uncomfortable. Maybe it goes against things that you thought you knew before, like all of those things. And then sometime around months, maybe like 2.5 to 3.5, sometimes later, a click just happens, and all of a sudden we're having wins, and I'm getting messages from my clients that like, oh my god, I did that thing that we talked about and it totally worked, oh my goodness. Or I'm getting messages saying, I get it now, this is why I need to, implement these consequences and have this structure and stuff like that. I just had a session with some clients on Monday. Not that you care. I don't know why I care so much what day I'm telling you, because you're going to listen to this whenever you're going to listen. Just for reference, today's Wednesday. And I had a session with some clients this week where they had a fail, or what they considered a fail. Like, my kid forgot his jacket at home, teenage kid, and called me and asked me to bring it to him, and I did. But she was so excited because she's like, but on the way home, in the car, on the way home, I realized like, oh, that wasn't good. And I get it now. I get why this isn't great. Like, I can see how, even though maybe I didn't mind bringing him his coat, it's not helping him for me to bring him his coat. Like, all of a sudden, all these concepts that we're talking about really started clicking. Same thing's happening with another couple that I'm working with right now. Get a message from dad about a week ago saying, oh my gosh, I like, in the midst of losing my temper at my kid, I just had this moment of like, I don't have to do this, I can just walk away. And then I started thinking about how great it was to walk away, and how it was better for my kid and it was better for me. I get it, it's starting to happen. So these couples, these parents, are just right on time in their evolution. And here's what happens a lot right around this time is, okay, I get it now. Consequences, they're the jam. I need to do this. I'm going to definitely do it. It makes sense to me. It's not just something I'm doing because my coach is suggesting it to me. It's because I really, really embody it and believe it. And so I sat down with my kid and I said, if you don't go to school today, there will be consequences. Or if you choose not to buckle your seatbelt, there will be consequences. Or if we have a lot of screaming and yelling at dinner time, there will be consequences. My message to you, if you're in this like transition, like pivot point, and you're turning this corner, is awesome. I'm so happy. I can't even actually put into words the little flutter I get in my chest when I get these messages from my clients of like, it's working. I get it now. I can see it. Holy crap. I love it. It feels so gratifying. I'm so happy for them. Like, the joy that's in their voice is so palpable. And saying to a kid, if blah, 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 there's going to be consequence, not really setting a boundary or giving a consequence. It's a threat. Whoops. There's that pesky if word again. Okay. So you're on the right track. You are kicking ass and taking names. And let's tighten it up even more with not saying the if word, and without saying there's going to be consequences. Okay. So instead, we're going to talk about using true boundaries, true rules. And here's where the flip comes in. Okay. So I want you to think about the rules that you set in your family are actually rules for you. They're not rules for your kid. And I'm going to tell you what I mean in a minute. It's actually really profound. Okay. So let's just say I'm trying to set a rule around screen time. And the rule I'm setting is that you can have screen time after you have taken care of your chores. That's a rule. That's a rule in our house. Now, how we would normally set that rule in our minds is, okay, my kid has to do this, this, and this before they can have screen time. Very simple. That's the rule. Do your chores before you have screen time. No screen time unless you've done your chores. There's the rule. In my mind, I'm thinking about this in terms of what my child needs to do in order to unlock this amazing privilege of screen time. Now I'm going to say, take all of that beautiful thought that you just had about your kid doing all this stuff and what they need to do and what their responsibilities are and all that stuff. I want you to throw it in the trash. I want you to light the trash on fire. And then I want you to roll that entire fiery trash pile out into the street and drive over it with your car. And the reason why I'm being so adamant about that is because we're falling back into old habits when we think about rules this way. We're falling back into the habit of, I'm setting this rule to manage your behavior. I'm setting this rule to control you, essentially. Let that go, because we are so stepping out of our lane when we start thinking about rules, discipline, boundaries, consequences, parenting in general as an exercise in managing and controlling somebody else. We are barking up the wrong tree. We have lost before we've even begun to fight. Okay. Instead, come back to the screen time rule. Okay, great. The rule in our house is screens are for kids who finish their chores. Fabulous. I have just set a rule for myself. I set a rule that I can't give my kid the remote, the iPad, the phone, the Switch, the whatever it is, until their chores are done. I set a rule for myself, and it's on me to follow that rule. It's entirely in my control whether that rule gets followed or not. And it's entirely my responsibility. I can't break that rule. If I want to truly show up with integrity as a parent, I can't break that rule. I may not give my child the remote until their chores are done. And if that child winds up watching TV before their chores are done, it's because I broke a rule. I did not fulfill my commitment. I did not follow my own rule for myself. You can do this little switch with every single thing that you are trying to set rules around. What if, and this is the challenge for you today, I want you to walk through your entire day. Think about all the rules you've already set in your family. Think about the rules that are just accidentally tumbling out of your mouth as you talk all day long, right? Do the switch with every single one of those. Realize how many rules you're setting for yourself. Ask yourself, like, am I going to actually follow all these rules that I set for myself? What am I going to do? What's the consequence for myself if I don't follow this rule? Start stepping into radical responsibility, radical accountability. And this is why I love to talk about boundaries. This is why I love to talk about rules. And this is why I love to talk about consequences. We're in this situation where it's like, hey, if you do blah, 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 there's going to be a consequence. You're not thinking about yourself at all. You're not taking any ownership. You're not taking any responsibility, and you're being super vague and threatening to your kiddo. It's really hard to make this like super awesome accountability, responsibility switch when we're talking to our kids this way. So why I put such an emphasis on wordsmithing, which can seem kind of pedantic and, I don't know, frivolous. The reason why I put that emphasis on that is because once you actually have it nailed in that whole wordsmithing department, becomes so much easier for us to have that mindset shift of like, oh wait, I just set a rule for myself. I better actually pay attention and throw and toe the line here, right? It's really hard to make that switch when we're saying things in ways that are totally unenforceable, that don't mean anything, that are really vague, that are kind of threatening. Those are really hard things to make an accountability switch around. And speaking of accountability, this one little last tidbit for you before we segue is, there's a book out there. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It kind of was like a little bit of pop psychology buzz a few years ago. It's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a an F. And that book's great. It's got some really cool stuff in it. But one thing that he says in there that I really like is he talks about how conflated our ideas of guilt and responsibility are. or blame and responsibility. Meaning, we as human beings find ourselves in situations all the time that we did not create necessarily, meaning it wasn't our fault. It's not our fault that someone cut us off when we were driving. It's not our fault that our kid didn't do their chores before they had screen time. It's not our fault that we even got pregnant in the first place necessarily, right? But just because something's not our fault doesn't mean it's not a responsibility. So his whole thing is like step into massive radical responsibility. So what if we are constantly, whatever situation we are in, we are responsible for that situation. We might not be to blame for that situation. We might not be guilty for that situation, none of that. But now we find ourselves in this predicament. This predicament has now become our responsibility, and we have infinite choice and infinite potential on how we manage that responsibility. I want you to think about something as simple and tangible and terrestrial as chores and screen time and, cleaning your room and eating your dinner and et cetera, et cetera. Those very concrete, tangible things, I want you to start looking at those things through that lens of radical responsibility. What we tend to do as parents is simultaneously blame our kids for their poor behavior, but try to take responsibility at the same time, meaning we try to control the situation. That's not actually responsibility. That's blaming and controlling at the same time. Not a great look. It doesn't look good on you. I promise you. I don't know what you look like. I don't know who you are, but I can promise you that the blame control combo is not a good look for you. So I want you to swap it for that responsibility. Well, here I am. I'm in this situation where my kid really wants to watch TV, but they haven't done their chores anymore. What is my responsibility here? Oh, I remember I set a rule for myself that I will not give my child the remote until their chores are done. Easy peasy, right? That path forward becomes so much more straightforward and clear. And it's not about how can I get my kid to do their chores? How can I make them do their chores? Why are they watching TV when they haven't done their chores? None of that. You don't not need to go down that whole like drama spiral whatsoever. It's a very simple thing. Rules are for us. Just like if you listen to previous episodes around boundaries, we talk about boundaries are for us. That can be a little esoteric. It's about taking care of yourself, all that stuff. It's true. It's really, really true. But sometimes it's great to have maybe a lower rung on the ladder to reach for first. So forget about boundaries. Let's talk about rules. Rules are set for you to follow. Are you following your rules? That is your question for today. And speaking of questions, like to wrap up each episode with a question from the listener. And I got a great question. Now, this one, sometimes I like to try to make it if the questions really line up with the topic we're talking about. The good news is pretty much every parenting question is lined up with pretty much every parenting concept. So it's not a huge exercise on my part, not a lot of heavy lifting involved there, but this one might seem like it's a little bit out in left field. So I got a question about nighttime bedwetting. And I actually really love this question, partly because it's very near and dear to my heart. As you all know, I have 4 kiddos, 2 of them potty trained, including at nighttime by the age of like 2.5. And 2 of them did not. And so we had 2 times situations where our kids were totally potty trained during the day, but at night, not so much. In fact, it was like clockwork that they would definitely wet the bed every night. And we're not talking about like every once in a while or, oopsies, we had an accident. It was like, this is how my body works. At nighttime, I don't pee in my pants. At daytime, I don't pee in my pants. And at nighttime, I pee in my pants. That's what my body does. And so it can be really frustrating. So the first thing I want to say to this listener who says, I have a son who's 7 years old, he's in 2nd grade, and he still is wetting the bed at night. What am I doing wrong? The first thing I want to say, listener, is I get it. It is really frustrating. And we do, especially as time goes on and our kids get older and older and older, like, what is going on? Why is this kid still wetting the bed? Now, there are lots of tools out there that you can use to try to help your kiddo stop wetting the bed. There's like alarms that you can put like on their underwear that when they get wet, they go off. And so they wake the kiddo up. Or there's like pads you can put on the bed that has an alarm when it gets wet, all these things. My advice is to not bother with any of them, because when you look at nighttime bedwetting, it is about neurological brain development and not a whole lot else. So during the day, using the potty and holding your pee and, poop and all that stuff, that's a learned behavior. That's something that we can actually teach and create like this skill building experience for our children around, because they are conscious. They feel the sensation of needing to urinate. They feel the sensation of having to poop, and they can start to make cognitive connections with that feeling and what you do when you have that feeling, just like we all do when we potty train. But at night, this has much more to do with things like the size of your child's bladder, the ability of their nervous system to send messages to wake you up when you have to go to the bathroom. And those things aren't things that we as parents can really do a whole lot to change. Now, if your child is bedwetting because of trauma or an emotional problem or some big change in life or something like that, that's a different conversation. But there are lots and lots and lots and lots of kids who are still bedwetting when they're 9 even, or 10. And it's not because their parents are failing them or that there's anything wrong with them even. It's literally a matter of growing into your bladder and your brain. So my advice to you is to go and listen to some comedy. Sarah Silverman was a bedwetter. In fact, I think her first comedy album is called Bedwetter. And she talks about it all the time. Because when you're a bedwetter, especially as you get older, you go to slumber parties, or camp or stuff like that, and you might feel scared and embarrassed and ashamed and all of those things. So the best thing we can do as parents is support our kids around whatever emotions they're feeling around the fact that they haven't learned nighttime potty training yet. So really normalizing it, not making a big deal out of it, being great listeners and validators when they do have emotions about it, supporting them in terms of like what can help them have an easier time of it when they go to a slumber party or something like that. And helping them really be resilient and build their self-confidence so that, if somebody says something that hurts their feelings or whatever, they know how to take care of themselves around that. That's honestly the best thing we can do for bedwetter kiddos. And every once in a while I start to doubt that. And I think, is that really true? Because like they sell all of this stuff that supposedly helps you with bedwetting. And I'll ask our pediatrician. I've even taken one of those 2 kiddos to the urologist and asked, and I always get the same answer. It is a sad but frustrating situation, and there's really nothing we can do about it. I will say, as a parent, sometimes it's nice to be given the direction from somebody like, oh, not your problem. You can't do anything about this. Like, oh, phew. Okay, great. So I don't have to figure this out. Just wait. It will happen. You will figure it out. All of that stuff. So I hope that helps. I hope you feel validated and normalized that this is no big deal, even though it feels like a big deal. And that the more you can believe that, the more you can support your child in believing that too. I hope that was helpful. I hope this is a really good, meaty episode for you all. And I can't wait to talk to you again next week. If you're ready to get your question answered on the podcast, go to my website and send me a message. It's AnnKaplanParentCoach.com. Super easy. All that information is in the show notes. And I can't wait to get your questions and answer them on the podcast. Talk to you all next week. Bye, everybody. The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/KaplanCall, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.